Welcome back to another episode of Unsung Heroes, the podcast where we examine the lesser-known actions and stories of military veterans of the United States and issues they faced on and off the battlefield. I'm your host, retired Air Force pilot Robert Young, and today we're back with episode 146 of the series. I really think everyone's going to enjoy this story of former World War I Sergeant Lao Sin-Kee. The historical context surrounding Kee was one of the institutional racism and discrimination. The immigration office during most of Kee's life had openly been tasked to keep out and deport as many Chinese Americans as possible, since the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 pretty much barred the immigration of Chinese laborers and even denied them the right to become naturalized U.S. citizens. Terrence Powderly from 1897 to 1902 and Frank Sargent from 1902 to 1908, as the U.S. Commissioners General of Immigration, made no secret of their dislike of the Chinese. Sargent even went as far as boasting about employing every legal and illegal means of keeping the Chinese out and deporting them. All Chinese immigration had been completely banned by 1902, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended and made permanent. Additionally, the Immigration Act of 1917 had created an Asiatic barred zone that banned all immigration from countries stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Middle East. Congress openly proclaimed that the goal was to shut down immigration from Asia and limit all other immigration, especially from Eastern and Southern Europe. So pretty much only whites from Northwestern Europe were welcome after that. Later laws also required Chinese Americans to carry photo passports with them at all times, prohibited them from buying land. Even after the Chinese Exclusion Act was abolished, there was a quota for entry for Asian Americans based on an admissions process that involved race and origin until the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 was passed, which pretty much shut all that down. Looking at Lao Sin-Kee's early life, he was born to Chinese immigrants in 1896 and grew up near Santa Clara, California, in the small town of Saratoga. His father operated a store and labor contract business in Saratoga and later lived in San Jose. Sin-Kee was also educated in Oakland in the American public school system growing up, so despite being born to Chinese American immigrants, Sin-Kee really saw himself as an American and truly identified with the American dream. Not to mention watching his immigrant father achieve success, starting a business, and building himself up from pretty much nothing, had a tremendous impact on him and his views towards the United States. And it really showed him how immigrants make real contributions to the U.S. Also, just Kee's background in general caused him to spend the entirety of his early life embracing American idealism and developing a sense of patriotism. Ultimately, Kee's values developed during his early years greatly shaped his decision to enlist in World War I and serve in the Army, and helped shape his post-war decisions even to help Chinese immigrants migrate to the U.S. in spite of anti-Chinese immigration policies, such as the aforementioned Chinese Exclusion Act. Looking at the military career of Sin-Kee, decorated military career at that, he enlisted in the United States Army in 1917 and was assigned to the 306th Infantry Regiment of the 77th Infantry Division in the U.S. Army. The division was mainly made up of Americans from New York City, thus their official unit name of Statue of Liberty Division, and accompanying patch insignia with a famous icon of the Statue of Liberty. Unofficially, though, they were known as the Cosmopolitans because they were a mixed bag of nationalities and languages, but many first-generation immigrants from all over, different parts of Europe, Asia, you name it, they had it. So the 77th Infantry Division arrived in France in April 1918 to join the fight of World War I. The division fought their first action at the Battle of Chateau Thierry in July 1918. Life on the front was very difficult. However, there's constant artillery shelling, occasional aerial bombardment, machine gun fire, poison gas attacks, you name it, they had to deal with it. So pretty tough living for them over there. The shelling became so heavy at night that it even prevented reinforcements from moving forward at all to replenish the wiped out crews. So shell craters, according to the official division of history, were described as being as large as 18 feet in diameter and 10 feet deep. That's pretty big. So on August 14th, Kee, who was moved with his division to the village of Mont-Notre-Dame, began getting shelled with these huge artillery rounds coming in at 30 rounds per minute. Absolutely ridiculous amount of bombardment they were facing at Mont-Notre-Dame. Because of the constant rain of shells, there was no way to maintain an intact field telephone wire, and because of the technology of the time, that pretty much limited them to handwritten messages. So in order to deliver those handwritten messages, there were soldiers that were known as runners, which literally ran from unit to unit and delivered the appropriate information. It was an incredibly dangerous but important task with a high casualty rate, as the runners couldn't hide anywhere when they were moving fast across the field to get to their next location. So during this particular bombardment on August 14th, Lau Sing-Kee was one of 20 initial runners selected for this job. But one by one, all of Sing-Kee's comrades were killed or wounded. Despite being gassed and severely wounded himself, however, Sing-Kee refused to be evacuated and actually stayed at his job single-handedly for 24 hours as the sole runner. Just absolutely amazing what one person was capable of doing. So the independent weekly publication from New York described Kee's heroic efforts as, quote, running 8 miles through shrapnel and machine gun fire as a messenger, end quote. So despite being the first-generation American, Sing-Kee had displayed some of the most patriotic actions out of anyone on the battlefield. One of Kee's fellow soldiers even stated, "He's the best American in our regiment." Sing-Kee would be awarded with the Distinguished Service Cross for this heroism on August 14th, and which is the second highest combat medal of the United States, directly behind the Medal of Honor. And not only that, but he was the first Chinese American to ever win any kind of service medal for anything. So the citation for the Distinguished Service Cross that Kee received stated that throughout this critical period he showed extraordinary heroism, high courage, and persistent devotion to duty, and totally disregarded all personal danger. By this determination, he materially aided his regimental commander in communicating the front line. Additionally, Kee was awarded the Purple Heart by the U.S. Army for his wounds, and the Croix de Guerre with Silver Gilt Star by France. Just incredible what Sing-Kee was able to do in the face of the enemy and really demonstrate his love for the United States despite the discrimination he had to face growing up. Unfortunately, Sing-Kee's valiant actions and those of other Asian Americans were not enough, though, to reverse any real institutional racism against Asian Americans and Asian immigrants during this time period. Looking at Sing-Kee after the war, he came home to New York City, where he found a job working as a translator with the U.S. Immigration Service, an organization that was actually hated and feared in many ways by a lot of the members of the Chinese American community. In the 1930s, Sing-Kee actually left this position as translator and opened multiple Chinese restaurants in Brooklyn and Staten Island, and later became an immigration broker and travel agent for the China Overseas Travel Service in New York's Chinatown. With the Sino-Japanese War and World War II around this time, many Chinese tried to flee the United States despite the laws that prohibited large-scale Asian immigration. So to get around this, many Chinese immigrated under what is known as the paper son technique, in which migrants become citizens by obtaining fraudulent documents, claiming they're children of Chinese Americans. So Sing-Kee spent many years assisting these Chinese immigrants in this process, and was eventually arrested for this practice and spent over 2.5 years in prison towards the end of his life. Kee died at his home on Staten Island in 1967, 2 years after the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 abolished the quota system and ended the admissions policy based on race and ethnicity. Following Kee's legacy, his body is interred at Arlington National Cemetery. So he lived a pretty extraordinary legacy, and I'm really glad he got to see the abolishment of some of those extremely racist policies. Bringing us to the current context of Sing-Kee's issues. In 2011, the Senate formally apologized for its history of discriminatory laws against Chinese immigrants. Aside from this formal apology, looking at Kee's situation of racism in the early 1900s in a present-day context, we unfortunately see many parallels. Currently, with an uptick in the COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic, there's been a myriad increase in anti-Asian discrimination due to the virus's origin in Wuhan, China. The United States government has done nothing to help this increased discrimination, with the president himself calling it the Kung Flu and Wuhan virus, Chinese flu, among other names. In the video from ABC News, you can see people walking up to Asian Americans spouting insults such as, "You want to kill me?" And proceeding to push and shove them. Just kind of horrible stuff we're seeing again. Racist, absolutely unexcusable. Additionally, politicians have put the blame for the virus on the wet markets in China, which has been leading to more hostility back home to all Asian Americans, not even just Chinese immigrants. Looking at current immigration through a different lens, the American Special Investigation Council released an abstract stating how current policies essentially criminalize immigration to the extent that it was seen during Sinke's lifetime. The abstract goes into how, despite a lower crime rate among immigrants, they're increasingly being subject to discriminatory felon laws that only apply to them and not U.S.-born citizens. They're being subject to anti-immigration stigma, which leads to more deportations for minor offenses and such. Although there's been much progress made toward immigration, and more specifically Asian immigration, to the U.S. in recent years, with the Chinese Exclusion Act, for instance, being struck down, that Sinke's battles on helping immigration that he fought for during his lifetime, unfortunately, we still see those today, and the fight continues in today's world. Thank you for listening to episode 146 of the Unsung Heroes podcast, the podcast where we examine an overlooked soldier's story and what they fought and died for during and outside of military context. Tune in next week for episode 147, where we're going to examine the case of Digby Tatham Warder, a World War II veteran who left a largely unknown contribution to Operation Market Garden. Until then, see ya.